So that was part one, our conversation at Sony Studios a couple of months ago on the work for First Man. And now in part two, we're going to focus on the production sound mixing that happened with the nominee Mary Ellis. Hello and welcome to part two of our conversation about First Man. We recorded part one a couple of months ago at Sony Studios with the team actually before the nominations came out. And I'm thrilled to be Skyping today with Mary Ellis. Mary, congratulations. I think it's amazing. It was just a year ago that I had you on the show and we were talking about Baby Driver.
Yes.
So I think I want to double check this, but I believe you are the first person to appear on our Oscar podcast in back-to-back years for two movies. So congratulations to you.
Thank you so much. It's quite a
And without a doubt. So as I mentioned, you are nominated for the Academy Award for Best Sound for your work on First Man. And you are sharing that nomination this year with John Taylor and Frank Montano and Ai-Ling Lee, who are the re-recording mixers on the film. And I should point out that Ai-Ling and Mildred Morgan are also nominated for Best Sound Editing. So this movie's got nominated in both categories, which is obviously an amazing honor.
Baby Driver.
As did Baby Driver. That's right.
Trend here.
So, Mary, when we talked a year ago, you were telling us about all these just insane challenges from Baby Driver and those long tracking shots and the music playback. So obviously First Man is a very, very different movie. But tell us a little bit about your work on the film and maybe what were some of the more challenging scenes for you to do, because obviously your job is you're on set recording the production sound.
Yes. First Man was just as challenging as Baby Driver, but in a very, very different way. It was almost like we did two movies. We started in September, and Damien wanted everything to be documentary style. It was almost all handheld. We did one Steadicam shot and maybe two dolly moves the entire movie. Fortunately, James Peterson, who did Baby Driver with me, also did this movie. And it was spectacular watching him and Linus, the DP, work together. We were fortunate in that we had 6 days of rehearsal with just him, Damien, and James, where they did all the work with the two young Armstrong children. It seems like the DP and James just developed a dance that was beautiful to watch. You'd see James suddenly duck behind a wall. Linus would swing around and do a 180, widen out. And they just really did a fabulous job working with each other and together. So the first half of the movie was all the stuff with the families, the period piece 60s, and then after Christmas we got into the Capsule Work, which presented it was like working on a different movie almost. The big challenge there was, of course, the fact that we had to have the helmets mic'd. We had to have earwigs. Well, we actually went with Comtex rather than earwigs because sometimes Ryan would stay in the capsule for 7 hours without getting out. And we want to make sure an earwig battery doesn't die because that blasts the actor. There's nothing we can do to prevent it with about 100 dB noise thing. So we developed an inner ear thing, working with props that went under their ears. We had the mics and the helmets. And of course we were limited there and that we couldn't do just what we wanted because Damien wanted everything to be period piece accurate. So like we could start from scratch with helmet design.
Well, before you go on, let me ask you, so what were the earwigs for? Was that so they could hear Damien or what was the purpose behind the earwigs?
Well, the purpose behind that was that when you get the three guys in the capsules, which are pretty much built to scale, incredibly tight quarters, once they get those helmets on, they can't even hear each other. So Alex Lowe from Baby Driver and First Man, our Pro Tools playback operator, we developed a system where they could speak. They could pretty much, we had 4 different feeds going. Ryan wanted to hear Damien and the other 2 actors and only his off-camera reader. We had 7 camera readers. We had a voice of God that went through this stuff for the ADs. And we had Damien. So the way Alex set it up was that whenever Damien spoke, all the other feeds shut down. So anytime Damien wanted to direct, everybody else went radio silent. It was an incredibly complex setup. Took us about, I don't know, an hour plus every day to set up, depending
Wow.
on, because every day somebody would decide, well, I want to hear his off-camera reader too. Or,
So you had to
So
change it
that
every day.
changed on a daily basis. So basically, Alex was there an hour and a half before shooting call every day to finesse that. It's quite complicated. He says it's the most challenging work of his career. He pulled it off brilliantly. He made me look like a rock star, and as does James. So that's helpful.
Well, at least you were on set, right? So it was fairly quiet, or was the capsule a noisy environment to capture dialogue in?
It was very noisy because it's basically a bucket of bolts, just like the real one. Don't realize how dangerous this stuff was, and we had all these NASA experts with us, astronauts, and one of my first questions with them was it really this loosey goosey? And he was like, "Oh yeah, it was really dangerous."
Yeah.
So, and everything was on a gimbal. So yeah, and then we had a huge LED screen. I would say a 300-degree screen. So it was. I mean, the movie I think is fantastic. What we achieved, it's just beautiful. I mean, it's beautifully done. It's so realistic. When they were doing some of the testing stuff, we kind of had to let Ryan sit down for about an hour because we had scrambled his brain so with all the gimbal stuff. So and then of course the big challenge for me and all of that was the air. Damien had originally wanted the 68 air in the suit so that you don't, of course, so they don't pass out from heat, and so that the helmets don't fog up. Well, that didn't work. It was just too noisy, and it's like. I finally appealed to him and said, Damien, you've heard the recordings from the actual missions. They sound horrible.
Right.
We've got to fix the air. So we ended up working with special effects and costumes on a way to get the air in that looked like it was coming in through the spacesuits. But Ryan was adamant that he didn't want to ADR 6 weeks of capsule work. So fortunately, he was on my side and pushing for what we felt like were acceptable levels and would keep him out of ADR.
Right.
So it was lovely to have the number one actor on my side for pushing for that. I don't think I could have achieved it without him because, of course, Damien didn't want to ADR all that much work either, but it was kind of like one of those things where nobody really wanted to take responsibility for it. Costumes didn't want to have to handle it. Special effects didn't want to have to handle it. Props didn't want to have to handle it. So finally, it was like after a series of pretty much cover your ass emails, it's like, come on, guys, between us 4 or 5 departments, we've got to find a solution for this. So fortunately, we did that early on. So we had one day of pretty much floundering, day one in capsules. And after that, we kind of had a plan B and C, and we got to something that worked.
Well, tell me a little bit about that. Because we've got a lot of students and people who are starting their careers who listen to this podcast, and I'm sure they would love to hear, so you're on the set, it's day one in the capsule, you can tell immediately this is going very badly. So what do you do in that situation? How do you handle that? How do you approach the director? How did you sort of how did you kind of pull yourself out of that hole?
Well, because I had been sending emails about this and that I was concerned about this, and I felt like we had to have different options about this. Special effects had an air compressor outside the stage. And so we were able to say, okay, let's try this. Let's see if this is going to work. But you don't solve it on the day. If you don't start weeks ahead of time, it's, you're fumbling around.
It's too late.
It's too late. It's way too late. And it's funny, Glenn, because my son is in film school in Lyon, France. And they asked for an interview with me, and they had heard your podcast from last year from Baby Driver. And the funniest thing they asked was, you and Tim and Julian didn't know each other before that podcast. And I was like, oh, we knew each other very well via email. We just never for that podcast. Right. So obviously I was vetted by Julian, or I wouldn't have been on Baby Driver in the first place. So that was very interesting. And the interview with the kids was really fun. One of the great questions they asked me was, how long between school and actually making money?
They're focused on practical, right? When do I get to well, of course, if they were in the States, they'd be, so when do I get to start paying these loans off?
Exactly. So yeah, that was interesting. You do have a tremendous amount of students listening to your podcast.
That's great.
So,
Well,
yeah.
we found out. I did a lecture down at Chapman University a while back, and I had a couple of professors come up to me and say, we teach the podcast, and we have questions on the exam from the podcast. And I thought, oh my, I felt terrible for those students.
Well, they quite enjoy him, I can tell you, because we did. My husband's the Dolly grip on Walking Dead, and we did another second session with the school with about 110 first-year students, and they asked a lot of great questions, and they all seem to have listened to stuff. So that was very refreshing.
Well,
They're reaching out there for information.
That's great. Tell me a little bit about, production sound record. I think most people think, well, that's really easy. You just put some microphones on the actors and you record, and away you go. You and I know different. But tell me a little bit about what's your typical recording package? What kind of microphones do you use? What's your setup?
Well, it just depends. The most challenging scene of my life was Mission Control on this film.
Really?
Oh yeah, and it looks so simple in the final cut. I almost cried.
Now, is that just because there are so many actors that you have to mic, or what was the challenge for Mission Control?
Challenge for Mission Control was that Damien wanted to shoot it documentary style with 3 cameras. We were shooting film, so we would shoot 9 minutes, cut, overlap a minute or so. It was 21 pages of dialogue, 7 subsets of different subsets of overlapping dialogue between the different teams on Mission Control. We wired 23 actors. We had 7 off-camera actors and 4 different earwig feeds. The actor that played Ben, who played John Hodge, wanted to hear all 23 microphones so that he could react to the chaos of the moment where the mission's going badly. And then, of course, other people, I think we sent out 4 different earwig feeds, Alex did, for that. Again, people started asking for different things. So I brought in Mike Clark. He's the sound mixer on The Walking Dead. And, of course, I asked for a tape truck, and that got shot down immediately for expenses. So we worked it out ahead of time, and I took the main mix because, the Dailies companies, they only want a Dailies mix. So I had the 6 main actors, a feed from Alex, and the Dailies mix, and he took the rest of the actors. And like I said, things changed, and I told them this was going to happen. I said, as soon as Damien gets this scene, which took a day and a half, he's going to start upgrading people because Neil Armstrong's son was in the background and various people who were. So the most important thing there was developing a seating chart. So if we stole microphone 7 from somebody who was done, we could put it on upgrade number 2. That was so confusing, but we were ready for it. I practically demanded they were doing a read-through on Saturday, and I actually kind of demanded that become a technical rehearsal for Michael and I, which turned out to be great because the scene was scheduled for 2 days, and we did it in a day and a half. So that was another great thing. Since Michael was there, sent him to do the second scene of the day, and I stayed and did the entire scene wild with all 23 actors and the upgrades. So that was great. Millie told me that, Mission Control sounds great. She said, but I hate to break your heart. Damien thinks it's way too clean. And oh my.
Well, that's a quality problem to have, quite frankly, because they can fix that in post pretty easy.
But, we saw the whole set. My producer kept saying, you just hired 2 more boom operators and you boom it in zones. But you've seen the movie. It's all glass. Mm-hmm. We see the floors, the walls, the ceilings, into the other glass rooms. You couldn't have gotten a boom anywhere in there. We used the booms for the slates for those 2 days. So
it was all radio. So it was all radio mics.
Yes, 23 radio mics. So.
And do you ever? Do you have problems with interference when you have 23 radio mics going on? How do you keep all that separated?
Well, that's why we did the technical rehearsal on Saturday, and we used the Freak Finder app. And thank God we had Saturday because actually Monday and Tuesday went seamlessly. because we had that time on Saturday, and it took us probably at least 2 hours to coordinate all those frequencies. Because it's not just that. It's my IFBs to my guys, his IFBs to his guys. So you're really talking about close to 30 wireless frequencies.
Mary, how much of your job is just problem solving and looking at a situation saying, how in the world am I going to do this?
I'd say a good 50%.
Well, and you don't seem to get the easy ones, do you?
Well, no, and I'm kind of happy about that. It's like, it was such a challenge to work with these guys. And early in my career, I got to work with Joe Johnson on October Sky and Hidalgo.
Right.
And I was, on a 2-track Nagra then, But of course, these guys like Denis and Joe and Edgar and Damien, they're such great visual storytellers that if you go to them, my first question in an interview with any of these guys is, what do you want this movie to sound like?
Right.
And all of these directors have been incredibly demanding, but at the same time, they know that sound is a very, very important component. And even back in the day when I was working with Joe and 2-camera things, he knew how to use 2 cameras that didn't hurt us for the soundtrack, if you know what I mean.
What do you mean?
You weren't doing black and white, your frame lines were similar. It wasn't impossible to achieve. But I miss the days when you could just, put 2 booms on there and, your wire was ISO'd for insurance. It's not like that anymore. Production sound mixing is very much a radio show every day in and day out, because of what we can fix now. I think is part of the problem, because you can clean up a lot that you couldn't 10, 15, 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So people are not quite as adept at saying, what I say, I need a road closure here, or some ITC, intermittent traffic control. Like, do you really? It's like, well, yeah, really. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think part of it, and I told the kids in France, is the homework. Get that script and do as much homework as you can. The locations, all of these things now, I really hate it because it kind of feels like a weird, I don't know, I wouldn't call it aggressive, but where you have to send out these emails ahead of time so that you've got a paper trail showing that, hey, this is what I'm concerned about. This is what we should be looking into. This is what the problem solving we should be doing in pre-production, because it normally doesn't get solved on the day. And
it's because there's too many people and the stakes are too high and the money's burning too fast. And tell me a little bit about when you go on a location scout during pre-production, what are you listening for, and what are you thinking about?
Well, it was different because with Edgar. The script was so unique. We had 22 songs everything was in sync to the movie, including the background, the gunfire, the sirens, right, the background action. So when I did the breakdown for that film, I for my second interview with him, came in and he said, I hope you have some questions. I had a 17-page breakdown with every song, everything in the movie, and was like, okay, how do we do this? So, and that was we kind of learned as we went along on that. It wasn't, First Man was kind of the same thing with Damien, but he just kept saying, I want it real, I want it real. So that's kind of, a little vague. But, it sort of evolves. You just have to keep asking them those questions. When we did our first scene with the Armstrong neighborhood, it was 8 principal actors and I think 10 kids. And like I said, it was just, our DP and B camera running around with handheld cameras.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because when we had the conversation a couple months ago with Millie and Eiling, that's something that kept coming up a lot was Damien's kind of goal was that this was supposed to look and feel like a documentary. So how did that affect your work?
Oh, it was just crazy. We wired everybody we could. We planted mics everywhere we could. We never knew what we're shooting. And take 3 was different than take 2. So we had 2 booms on ready all the time, and like I said, DPA plant mics all the time, and as many people as we could wire. So, like I said, and it would change. the DPA mics were great because, you Joe sticky stuff, behind the toaster. And then, okay, we're not going to go for that. Take 4, we're going to go for something else. Grab that DPA off the toaster and you put it on the refrigerator.
What is a DPA?
The DPAs are a little small gooseneck that go onto the wireless transmitters. It's a DPA 4098, I believe. Sounds great, easy to hide, good windscreen.
And those are your friends. So you just kind of plant those all over the set, or what do you do?
Yes. And, if I need them, I need them. If not, we still got a nice little ISO there. My goal is always to try to give editorial as much as possible. Right. Whatever I can give them, I give them. Last night, for instance, we were in a car with 3 actors, so we wired all 3 actors and we planted for all 3 actors. So if there's any seatbelt issues or whatever, hopefully there's another clean track for them.
Sure.
So,
and tell me a little. You mentioned mixing for dailies, so those are actually those are obviously the tracks that you hand over to Picture Editorial, and that's what they load into their Avid or whatever platform they're using. But tell me, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that you're actually live mixing on the set to go down to, what is it? Is it 2 tracks that you hand off for dailies, or tell me about that setup?
Not anymore. I was talking about back in the days when the Nagra had 2 tracks. No, I have 2 8-track machines, so I hand off 1 CF card that has the mix and 7 ISOs on it. If I need more mics than that, I have a second 8-track machine, which I bring into the Dailies mix through my board. So I can hand them off actually 15 tracks plus the mix. So hopefully it doesn't come to that. It gets awfully messy.
I'm sure
they pretty much a card with the mix and 7 ISOs every day for dailies.
But the mix that you're doing, is that a mono mix or is it stereo?
Yes. Whatever. Glenn, you're freezing up on me.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Can you?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Well, Company 3 only transfers the track 1, the mix. And of course, they import all the ISOs for editorial to sort through later. But the stuff that goes to the studios and is seen the next day is just my track 1. So obviously, I try to do the best mix I possibly can. Because that's every studio executive that's involved in the project. That's what they're listening to.
That's your first audience, isn't it? Yeah.
In order to get my next job.
Absolutely. Well, that was my questions. Is there anything else you want to tell us about First Man before we sign off?
Let's see. Well, the capsule work was very interesting. We did put the plant mics all over the capsules as well, even though the wired helmets ended up sounding great. Alex did such a phenomenal job about having no feedback, with the rigs that we made for the ears. And again, the multiple mixes that he was able to send were brilliant. But we ended up putting the mics all over the spacecraft and the gimbals, because the NASA consultants that we had, the old astronauts that were there, and so much fun to talk about great war stories. They said it really does sound like that. It's really noisy and frightening and all of that. And they were like, as much of that stuff as you can capture, you should. So we did that every day for every scene. We probably had 3 or 4 ISOs of just the bucket of bolts, as they called it, rattling. And, rivets popping and all that kind of terrifying stuff that they actually couldn't see a lot of and were like, oh, yeah, it was scary. But I thought Damien and Linus did a beautiful job with that movie. It's gorgeous. I'm so proud to be part of it.
That's
and,
fantastic.
Of course, that post-production team that I got to work with, they did a brilliant job with our stuff. Yeah. I was very, very happy. So I'm going to be in good company for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, you really will. Well, I just want to say too, I believe, my understanding is this is the first time that 3 women have been nominated for the Academy Award for Sound for the same film. You and Mildred and iLink, which is amazing.
Yes, I think so. And I'm not sure if this is true, but somebody told me last year, Glenn, that only Pud Cusack and myself have ever been nominated for production sound mixing. I don't know if that's true.
I wanted to ask you that because I don't know a lot of women production sound mixers. How did you get into this field, and what was your path to where you are right now?
Well, I got a degree in film and television from University of Alabama, moved to Atlanta. I could not get a job, and I ended up working in a small post house with an ABC sound mixer, a retired ABC sound mixer who had opened up a small post house. And we had editing suites, we did transfers, we did syncing, remixes, voiceover, and printed optical tracks. That's how long ago that was. And around 86, he pushed me out of the nest and said, if you're ever going to, he said, I can't afford to pay you. And I really wanted to travel, and I was young, and I was excited about seeing the world, and had fallen in love with the Nagra. And he said, just go do it.
Yeah.
So I did. So I sort of fell into it. Like I said, I'd done some sound work in college. I worked at a television station, but he was such a fabulous mentor, and it just sounded so exciting and glamorous. Of course, at 2 this morning, it wasn't so glamorous, but it's still exciting. So.
Well, but then you get to work with all those movie stars, right?
That's true. I'm working with Woody Harrelson, Emma Stone, and Jesse and Abigail 10 years later. So it's pretty fun.
Were you on the first one?
Yes, I was on the first Zombieland.
We're talking about, for those who, Mary's working right now on Zombieland 2.
You froze up on me again.
Sorry, you're working on Zombieland 2, which I can't wait to see.
Yeah, it's going to be funny.
That's great.
I think it's going to be funny. I mean, but we'll see.
Well, Mary Ellis, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. I know you're super busy right now, but congratulations again on your Academy Award nomination, and fantastic work on this film.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, Glenn.
Thank you, Mary. Bye-bye. Thanks again for tuning in. That was our conversation with the nominated team on the sound editing and sound mixing side for First Man. Thanks.